The night Mason Brooks stopped his truck on a frozen highway for a woman who didn't want his help, he had no idea he was about to lose everything he'd spent years building: his routines, his carefully guarded heart, and the quiet, manageable life he'd constructed around a little girl who deserved better than a father who'd stopped believing in anything beyond the next workday. He didn't stop because he was brave. He stopped because he was tired, and because somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded a lot like his daughter said, "You don't just drive past people, Daddy." What happened next would change both their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted, and not all of it would be easy or clean or without cost. If this is your kind of story, the kind where people find each other in the worst possible moments, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The cold came fast that February. It didn't ease in the way winter sometimes does in northern Ohio, a slow, creeping chill that gave you time to button your coat and brace yourself. This cold dropped like something thrown from a great height. By 7 in the evening, the temperature had fallen to 11 degrees, and by 9, when Mason Brooks finally pulled out of the parking lot of Harlan Fabrication and pointed his truck toward home, the roads had developed a thin, deceptive skin of ice that caught headlights and threw them back in shifting patterns, beautiful and dangerous the way certain things in life tended to be. Mason was 32 years old. He had hands that had been roughened by 12 years of sheet metal work, a truck with 140,000 miles on it, and a daughter named Lily, who was 6 and waiting at home with his neighbor, Mrs. Petroff, who charged $15 an hour and watched her telenovelas at a volume that rattled the windows. He was also carrying, in the passenger seat, a paper bag containing a half-eaten turkey sandwich and a thermos of coffee that had long since gone cold because he'd forgotten to eat lunch again and had promised himself he'd finish it on the drive home. He was unwrapping the sandwich one-handed when he saw the SUV. It was parked, or abandoned, it was hard to tell, on the shoulder of Route 9, a stretch of road that connected the industrial side of town to the residential neighborhoods and was almost completely empty after 8 at night. The SUV was a black Lexus LX, and even from 100 yards back, Mason could see it was newer, expensive, the kind of vehicle that looked wrong, sitting helpless in the gravel with its hazard lights blinking orange into the dark. No tow truck. No other cars pulled over, just the SUV and the cold and those hazard lights throwing their pulse across the frozen ground. Mason slowed down. He told himself he was just being cautious. Ice on the roads, visibility poor, better not to blow past a stationary vehicle at 50 miles per hour. But he knew, even as he was telling himself that he was going to stop. He'd been raised by a man who stopped. His father, Frank Brooks, had been the kind of person who could not drive past a broken-down car or a dog loose on the highway or an elderly person struggling with groceries without pulling over. It wasn't heroism. Frank had never called it that. "It's just what you do," he'd told Mason once. "You stop, you see if you can help, and then if they don't need you, you get back in the car and go home. That's the whole thing. That's all it is." Frank Brooks had died 4 years ago, a heart attack at 61, and Mason still heard his voice in the truck sometimes. He pulled in behind the Lexus and left his headlights on. For a moment, nothing happened. The hazard lights blinked. Mason sat there with his sandwich in one hand and watched the dark shape of the SUV for signs of movement. Then the driver's side door opened and a woman got out, and even from 30 feet away, even in the dark, something about the way she moved made him straighten up in his seat. She walked toward him with her arms crossed over her chest, not hugging herself against the cold, more like she was holding herself together by deliberate force. And she was wearing a coat that was clearly not designed for 11-degree weather. Business wear. A charcoal wool coat that stopped at the knee, and heels that were completely wrong for the ice and gravel of the highway shoulder. She stopped a few feet from his driver's side window. Mason rolled it down. She was around 30, he guessed. Dark hair pulled back severely, and a face that might have been striking under different circumstances but was currently set in an expression of controlled frustration that suggested she'd been here for a while and had made peace with the frustration, but not with the needing help part. "I'm fine," she said, first thing out of her mouth, before he'd said a word. Mason looked at her. Then he looked at the Lexus, then back at her. "Okay," he said. She waited, as if expecting him to argue or push or say something that would give her an excuse to be sharp with him. "You need me to call someone?" he asked. "AAA or—" "I already called. They said 90 minutes. She paused. "That was 2 hours ago." "Ah." Mason glanced at the thermos in his cup holder. "You want some coffee? It's cold, but it's—" "I'm fine," she said again. He nodded, looked at the Lexus again. "What happened?" She exhaled through her nose. "Flat tire." "You have a spare?" A beat. Something shifted in her expression, just briefly. "There's a spare in the back. I couldn't get the lug nuts loose. The wrench kept slipping." She said it the way someone says a thing they've been working up to admitting, like the words themselves were a concession. Mason glanced at her hands. Even in the dark, he could see they were red from the cold. "You been out here 2 hours?" "I kept thinking the tow was coming." He turned off his engine, pocketed his keys. "Let me take a look." She took a step back, not quite blocking his path, but not entirely making way for him either. "You don't have to do that." "I know." He opened his door and climbed out. The cold hit him like a wall. "You got a flashlight in there?" She stared at him for a second, really looked at him, in the way people do when they're trying to decide whether to trust something, and then turned and walked back to the Lexus without answering. Mason followed. The spare was full size and mounted correctly under the rear of the vehicle. That was good. The problem, when Mason knelt down and examined the flat tire by the light of her phone flashlight, she'd silently handed it to him when he'd held his hand out for it, was that whoever had installed the tires last had over-torqued the lug nuts to the point where you'd need an impact wrench to break them loose. The standard wrench in the emergency kit wasn't going to do it by hand, not without a breaker bar or a pipe for leverage. He looked around. Nothing useful on the shoulder. He stood up and his knees cracked from the cold. "I can't get them loose either," he said. "Not without—" "I know. I figured that out." She had her arms crossed again. The cold was making her jaw tight. "I just need the tow." "Where are you headed?" She hesitated. "I was going to—" She stopped. Started again. "I had a hotel reservation in Millfield. I canceled it." Another pause. "It's complicated." Mason looked at her. In the harsh backwash of his headlights, she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond 2 hours on a cold highway. It was the kind of tired that had been building for a long time and had simply found a convenient moment to show itself. "Okay," he said. "I'll wait with you until the tow gets here." "You really don't—" "I know I don't have to." He went back to his truck, retrieved his coat from the back seat, a heavy Carhartt that he kept there for job sites, and came back. He held it out to her. She looked at it, didn't take it. "It's clean," he said. "I washed it last week." Something crossed her face that might have been the beginning of a laugh if it had gotten a little further along before she stopped it. She took the coat. "What?" They stood there together at the side of the road, or rather, Mason leaned against the Lexus and the woman stood 3 feet away with her arms still crossed, now inside his coat, and didn't talk for a while. The hazard lights kept blinking. Occasionally a car went by on the other side of the highway, brief and indifferent, headlights sweeping across the dark, and then gone. After about 10 minutes, Mason said, "I'm Mason." She turned her head. "Victoria." "You from around here, Victoria?" "Columbus. Originally." She looked back at the road. I had a meeting in Millfield that got moved, and I took the wrong exit and then the tire." She said it flatly, like she was reading a list of evidence against herself. "Not my best day." "You want to talk about it, or you want to just stand here not talking about it?" She gave him a sideways look. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one. Some people find talking helpful. Some people just want to stand somewhere quiet for a minute. Either one's fine with me." She considered this. "The second one. For now." "Works for me." They stood there quietly. Mason's phone showed 11:15. He'd texted Mrs. Petrov 20 minutes ago. "Running late? Everything okay?" And she'd sent back a thumbs-up emoji, and then, 2 minutes later, a photo of Lily asleep on the couch with Mrs. Petrov's cat. He looked at the photo now and felt the particular specific weight of loving someone that much. Another 15 minutes passed. His phone rang. Not Mrs. Petrov, but the tow service, and the number was local. He answered it and handed the phone to Victoria without comment. He watched her face change as she listened. "What do you mean you can't come until morning?" she said, and her voice had gone very flat and very quiet, which he was already beginning to understand meant she was more upset than when she'd sounded sharp. "I called 3 hours ago." She listened. "No, I understand road conditions. I'm asking about my specific—" She listened again. Her jaw moved. "Fine. Yes. Fine." She handed the phone back. Didn't say anything for a moment. "They can't come until 6 a.m., she finally said. "Apparently there was a multi-car accident on the interstate and every truck in the county is tied up." "Yeah, I saw that on my way in. Bad one." She looked at the Lexus, then at the dark highway, then at nothing in particular. "Is there a motel around here?" she asked, and she asked it in the careful tone of someone who already suspects the answer. "Closest one's in Whitmore, about 20 miles east, but Route 7 is closed tonight. Black ice. I came through there an hour ago, and they were just putting up the barriers." She absorbed this. Her expression didn't change, not really, but something behind it did, a kind of quiet recalibration that he recognized, the look of someone who had been managing a situation and had just run out of options to manage. "Okay," she said, very quiet. "There's a diner about 4 miles up the road, open 24 hours. You could wait there until 6. In a diner. They've got good pie, allegedly." He paused. "Or—" He stopped. She turned to look at him fully. "Or what?" He looked at his truck, back at her. He was aware that what he was about to say sounded, on the surface, like exactly the kind of thing a stranger on a highway at 11 p.m. should not say to a woman he'd just met. He was also aware that it wasn't, and that the difference between those two things came down entirely to how you meant it and how you said it. "I've got a house about 8 miles from here," he said. "Spare room, clean sheets. My 6-year-old daughter is there with my neighbor, who I guarantee is still awake watching her shows because she always is. No expectations, no weirdness. You sleep? I get up early and drive you back here by 5:30, so you're here when the tow comes." She looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that was actually several different assessments happening simultaneously. "Why?" she said. "Because it's 11 degrees and you've been standing on a highway for 2 hours and you're wearing shoes that aren't meant for ice." "That's not—" She stopped. "That's not a reason. That's a description of circumstances." "Fine," he said. "Because my dad raised me to stop when someone needs help, and because my daughter is going to ask me tomorrow morning if I help the stranded person on the highway, and I'd like to be able to tell her yes." Something shifted in Victoria's face, a tiny thing, barely visible. "You told your 6-year-old about this?" "I texted my neighbor. Lily's asleep." He paused. "But she will ask. Trust me." The drive to Mason's house took 12 minutes. Victoria sat in the passenger seat with his Carhartt still around her shoulders and her hands in her lap and said almost nothing, which was fine. The radio was on low, country station, something slow, and the heat was running and the roads were empty and dark. Mason ate the second half of his turkey sandwich because he was genuinely hungry and there was no point letting it go to waste. He offered her half. She declined. He wasn't surprised. He lived on Darrow Street, a residential block of modest houses that had been built in the 1970s and showed it, but in a way that suggested maintenance and care rather than neglect. His house was the third from the corner, dark green siding, 2 steps up to the front porch, a kid's bike locked to the railing that he kept meaning to move into the garage before the weather rusted the chain. He pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. "Mrs." Petrov answered the door before he knocked, which meant she'd been watching from the window, which was unsurprising. She was 67 and had emigrated from Ukraine in her 30s, and had lived next door to Mason for 11 years, and had, in the 4 years since his wife Claire had left, become something between a neighbor and a reluctant grandmother to Lily, which she expressed primarily through opinions about Lily's diet, and secondarily through an inexhaustible supply of pierogies. She looked at Victoria, then at Mason, then at Victoria again. "She needs a place to sleep," Mason said. "Stranded on Route 9. Tow's not coming until morning. Mrs. Petrov's expression underwent a series of small adjustments. "Okay," she said, and stepped back from the door to let them both in. "Thank you for staying late," Mason said. "Your daughter wake up twice," Mrs. Petrov said, already putting on her coat. "Once because Biscuit sat on her face," Biscuit was the cat, "and once because she had a dream about a talking tree. She told me the whole story, very long." She looked at Victoria again, more openly this time, with the specific curiosity of someone who has seen enough of life to know that interesting things don't usually arrive at 11 p.m. by accident. "There is soup on the stove," she said, "from this afternoon. Still good." "Thank you, Elena," Mason said. Mrs. Petrov buttoned her coat and picked up her bag. At the door she paused and looked at Victoria. "You need anything? You knock on my door. Doesn't matter what time. House on the left." She pointed, as if Victoria might need the directional clarification. Then she left. The house was warm and smelled like soup and something else. A child's home smell, crayons and laundry. Something specific and hard to name. Victoria stood in the entryway and looked around while Mason locked the door behind them. The living room was small and organized in the practical way of someone who had learned to be organized out of necessity rather than preference. A couch that had seen a lot of use. A coffee table with a library book on it and a small pair of sneakers underneath. A drawing taped to the wall near the hallway. A figure with yellow hair and a much larger figure beside it, both labeled in the unsteady handwriting of a child learning letters. The big figure said, "Day Day." Victoria looked at it for a moment and then looked away. "Soup's on the stove if you want it," Mason said, coming into the room behind her. "Bathroom's down the hall, second door. Spare room is the first door on the right." "Mason?" He looked at her. "I don't—" She stopped. Tried again. "I don't usually do this, except help from strangers." "I know," he said. "I could tell. I'm not—" She looked around the room, at the drawing on the wall, at the library book on the table. "I'm not in the habit of needing it." "Yeah." He picked up Lily's sneakers from under the coffee table, set them by the door out of habit. "That's usually how it goes. You're fine until you're not, and then the not being fine part is harder because you're out of practice." She looked at him. "Is that from experience?" "Yeah," he said. Simple, no elaboration. "Soup's chicken noodle. Mrs. Petrov makes it from scratch. It's good." She ended up having the soup. They sat at the kitchen table, her with the soup, him with a glass of water because he'd had enough coffee already. And the quiet was different from the highway quiet. Warmer, less defensive. "What do you do?" she asked. She was eating steadily, which he took as a good sign. "For work. Sheet metal, fabrication and installation. Mostly commercial, HVAC systems, ductwork, sometimes residential." She nodded. "You like it?" The question caught him slightly off guard, not because it was a strange question, but because people didn't usually ask it. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I like working with my hands, solving problems that have physical solutions. You either fit the piece or you don't." He paused. "What about you?" A beat, longer than it needed to be. "I was in corporate strategy," she said. "Executive level." The past tense was deliberate, and they both heard it, and she didn't add anything to explain it. "Was," he said. "Was." She looked at her soup. "Until about 3 weeks ago." He didn't ask. She didn't offer. They sat with it for a moment, the way you sit with the weight of something that doesn't need more words put on it. "Your daughter," she said after a bit. "What's her name?" "Lily. She's 6. A small, involuntary thing happened to his face. "She's the one who would have asked about you tomorrow morning. She always wants to know if I was kind to people. It's like a nightly debrief." "She asks you that?" "Every night at dinner. 'Did you help anyone today, Daddy?' Every single night. I don't know where she got it from." He paused. "Actually, that's not true. I know exactly where she got it from." Victoria looked at him. "Your dad?" "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "She sounds like a remarkable kid." "She is." He said it plainly, without the false modesty that people sometimes use when they're bragging and trying not to show it. He wasn't bragging. He was just stating a fact. "She makes me want to be better than I am, Most days, which is, he exhaled. That's a lot to feel about a 6-year-old, but there it is. Victoria looked at him with the careful expression of someone reassessing something, like she'd walked into a room expecting it to be one thing and found it was something else. He showed her the spare room at close to midnight. It was small, a full bed, a dresser, a window overlooking the backyard. Lily had decorated it at some point with stickers along the windowsill, small stars and flowers, the kind that came in sheets from the dollar store. The bed had clean sheets and 2 blankets, which Mason silently thanked his past self for, the version of himself who had changed the sheets 2 days ago for no particular reason. "The radiator makes noise," he said from the doorway. "Knocking sound. I keep meaning to bleed it. If it keeps you up, there's extra blankets in the closet." "I'll be fine." "Bathroom has clean towels. Help yourself." "Mason," she turned from the window. "Thank you. I mean it." "It's not a big deal," he said, and he meant that too. Not as false humility, but as an honest assessment. It didn't feel like a big deal. It felt like the only sensible thing to do on a cold night when someone needed a place to be. "It is," she said. "You don't know that, but it is." He didn't argue with her. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night." He pulled the door partly closed, not all the way because Lily sometimes got up in the night and he didn't want her to be startled by a closed door where there was usually an open one, and walked back down the hallway to his own room. Lily found her at 6:15 in the morning. Mason heard it from the kitchen. He was up at 5:45, as always, making coffee and packing his lunch for the day out of habit before remembering he needed to get Victoria back to the highway by 6:30. He heard the soft pad of Lily's feet, and then a pause, and then Lily's voice, high and direct the way 6-year-olds' voices are when they aren't yet worried about being polite. "Who are you?" He was already moving toward the hallway. Victoria was standing in the doorway of the spare room in the same clothes she'd been wearing the night before, her hair loose now, and she was looking down at Lily with an expression that Mason would think about later and not quite be able to describe. Not alarmed, not annoyed, something more like startled, the way people look when they encounter something genuinely unexpected. Lily was in her pajamas with the owls on them, holding her stuffed rabbit, looking up at Victoria with the frank assessment of a child who had not yet learned to pretend she wasn't looking. "I'm Victoria," the woman said. "I got stranded on the road last night. Your dad gave me a place to stay." Lily processed this, turned and looked at Mason, who had appeared at the end of the hallway. "Did you help her?" "Yeah, Bug. I helped her." Lily turned back to Victoria, held out the rabbit. "Do you want to hold Gerald? He helps when you're scared." Victoria looked at the rabbit, then at Lily. Her expression did something complicated and quiet. "I'm not scared," she said. "Okay," said Lily, unbothered. "He's available if you change your mind." She looked at Mason. "Can I have the cinnamon cereal?" "Regular cereal today. We're out of cinnamon." "That's a tragedy," Lily said, and walked past him toward the kitchen. The tow truck came at 7:20, not 6 as promised, because the driver had gotten turned around in the dark. Victoria had already been at the highway for 45 minutes by then, standing in the cold in her inadequate coat. She'd declined to borrow his Carhartt a second time, with a firmness that suggested she felt she'd already incurred enough debt, watching the hazard lights of her Lexus blink steadily in the gray morning light. Mason had driven her out and waited, because he wasn't going to drop a person at the side of a highway and drive away. She'd told him he didn't have to. He'd said he knew. The tow driver was a guy named Gary who seemed personally offended by the over-torqued lug nuts and changed the tire while delivering a running commentary on the failures of modern tire shops that neither Mason nor Victoria responded to. When it was done and Victoria had her keys back and was standing beside a roadworthy vehicle for the first time in about 10 hours, she turned to Mason. "I should pay you," she said. "For last night. The room, the soup. No." "Mason?" "I'm not going to take money for letting someone sleep in my spare room," he said. "That's not how that works." She looked at him steadily. "Then I don't know how to—" She stopped. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "At not—" She pressed her lips together. "At owing people things." "You don't owe me anything," he said. "We're even. You were stranded. I had a room. That's the whole transaction. She looked at him for a long moment. The morning was gray and cold, and the highway was still mostly empty, and Gary, the tow driver, had gotten into his cab and was texting on his phone and paying no attention to them. Your father taught you well, she said finally. Something moved through Mason's chest at that, a quick, specific ache that he'd gotten used to carrying around. Yeah, he said. He did. She nodded once, opened her car door, then paused. Lily is... She stopped. She's a good kid. The best one I know. Yeah. Victoria looked at her hands on the car door. Something in her face was doing that complicated quiet thing again. Tell her thank you for Gerald. I will. She got in the car. He watched the Lexus pull out and head east on Route 9, its taillights shrinking in the morning gray until they disappeared around a bend in the road. The highway was quiet. Gary had driven off. The gravel shoulder was empty except for Mason and his truck and the faint tire impressions where the Lexus had sat for most of a long night. He stood there for a minute longer than he needed to. Then he got in his truck and drove home to make Lily's breakfast. He thought about her on the drive back, not in any specific way, not in a way he examined or cataloged or tried to make into something. He just thought about her the way you find yourself thinking about a dream after you wake up, not clearly, not completely, just the shape of it, the way she'd crossed her arms, the way she'd said I'm fine before he'd even opened his mouth, the look on her face when Lily had offered her the rabbit. He turned onto Darrow Street and saw the lights on in his kitchen through the front window and knew Lily was already in there with her cereal bowl and her opinions about cartoon animals, and the thought of it pushed everything else aside like it always did. He parked the truck and went inside. She's gone? Lily asked, without looking up from her cereal. She's gone. Is she okay? Yeah, Bug. She's okay. Lily chewed thoughtfully. She seems sad, she said. Not the scared kind of sad. The other kind. What other kind? The kind that's been there a long time. She looked up at him. Like the kind you used to have. Mason looked at his daughter, 6 years old and looking at him with Frank Brooks's eyes, the same ones that saw through everything without trying, without meanness. Just clear. Yeah, he said. Something like that. Lily nodded and went back to her cereal. Outside, the morning was coming up gray and cold over Darrow Street, and the bike was still locked to the porch railing, and somewhere on Route 9 a black Lexus was heading toward whatever came next. Mason put the kettle on and stood at the kitchen window and watched the light change, and didn't let himself think about it any further than that. At least not yet. She called him 3 days later. Mason was on a ladder 20 feet up inside a half-finished office building when his phone buzzed in his chest pocket, and he almost didn't answer it because he didn't recognize the number, and he had a section of ductwork balanced against his knee, and answering unknown numbers while working at height was the kind of habit that got people hurt. But something made him pause. He shifted the ductwork, got it stable, and looked at the screen. Columbus area code. He answered. It's Victoria. A brief silence, as if she hadn't quite worked out what she was going to say after that. From the highway. I know who you are, Victoria. Right. Another pause. I wanted to return your coat. He hadn't thought about the coat. He'd forgotten entirely that she'd still been wearing it when she'd gotten in the Lexus. You could have just mailed it. I was going to. She stopped. I was also going to... Look, I found a place. An extended stay hotel in Whitmore. I've been there 2 days and the heater doesn't work properly, and they charge for parking and the Wi-Fi cuts out every 40 minutes. She said all of this in a flat recitative, like she was reading a report on a situation that had nothing to do with her emotionally, which he already understood meant it had everything to do with her emotionally. I looked into other options, but everything in this area that's reasonable is either booked or... She stopped again. I'm not... A breath. I'm asking if the room is still available. Your spare room. I would pay rent, actual rent. I'd look up the going rate for the area and pay that. I'd be out of your way. I keep strange hours. I don't need much. Victoria. What? Stop pitching. It's fine. A silence. You don't even know how long I'm asking for. How long? A few weeks. Maybe a month. I have some... She chose her words carefully, the way people do when the real words feel too exposed. I have some things to sort out professionally. I need a stable base. I won't be underfoot. Mason thought about the spare room with the dollar store star stickers on the windowsill. He thought about Lily asking, is she okay with her spoon halfway to her mouth? He thought about Mrs. Petrov, who was already going to have opinions. One condition, he said. What? You eat dinner with us. Not every night, but when you're home. Lily's going to find out you're there regardless, and if you hide in the room, she's going to make it her personal mission to figure out why. And trust me, that's worse than just eating dinner. The silence that followed was different from the other silences. Softer somehow. That's your condition? That's my condition. Okay, she said. Okay. Yes. She arrived on a Wednesday evening with 2 suitcases and a laptop bag and a box of files that she carried herself, declining his offer to help with a "I've got it" that was clearly reflexive. He showed her the room again. She stood in the doorway looking at the star stickers on the windowsill as if she'd remembered them. And she put her things down in the methodical way of someone organizing a temporary situation, not moving in but establishing a workable arrangement. What's the Wi-Fi password? She asked. He told her. She typed it into her phone without writing it down. Bathroom situation? She asked. Same as before. I'm usually done by 6:15. Lily's in there by 7. If you're up before 6, you've got it to yourself. I'm usually up at 5:30. Then you're fine. She nodded, looked around the room one more time. He watched her clock the stickers again, the drawing on the wall in the hallway visible from where she was standing, the particular texture of a house that had been shaped by the daily habits of a man and a small girl. He couldn't tell what she was thinking. Thank you, she said. Again. Stop thanking me, he said. It makes me feel like you're keeping a ledger. She looked at him. What if I am? Then you should know I'm not, he said. So the math is never going to work out the way you want it to. She held his gaze for a long moment. Something in her expression moved and then went still again, like a curtain caught by wind. Good night, Mason. Good night. He pulled the door most of the way closed and went back down the hallway, and this time it felt different from the first time he'd done it. This time the house felt like it had a different weight to it, a different kind of fullness. He noticed it and didn't know what to do with it, so he went and checked Lily's homework and put a load of laundry in and did not think about it any further. He was getting reasonably good at not thinking about things. The next morning, Lily came to the breakfast table with Gerald tucked under her arm and said, without preamble, she's back. She's staying for a few weeks. She needed a place. Lily looked at him with Frank Brooks's eyes. You told her she could? I did. Lily accepted this with the equanimity of a child who has decided the adults are probably handling things correctly. Can she sit with us at breakfast? If she wants, she's got her own schedule. I'm going to ask her. You can ask. Don't push. Lily nodded seriously and ate her cereal, and Mason had a feeling she was already composing the ask in her head. Victoria was in the kitchen when he got there, standing at the counter with her laptop open and a cup of coffee she'd made herself. She'd found the coffee maker and the ground beans and the mugs with the efficiency of someone who had developed a talent for becoming functional in unfamiliar spaces. She was in different clothes than the night before, dark slacks and a cream-colored blouse that said she had somewhere to be or was at least preparing herself mentally for the idea of somewhere. Her hair was pulled back again. Morning, Mason said. Morning. She nodded at the coffee maker. I hope it's okay that That's what it's there for. She went back to her screen. He started making Lily's lunch, so peanut butter on whole wheat, grapes, the small bag of pretzels she liked. And the kitchen was quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the February morning was white and still, and the refrigerator hummed, and Victoria's fingers moved occasionally on her keyboard. Lily arrived, assessed the situation in about 3 seconds, and climbed up onto the stool across from Victoria at the counter. Good morning, she said. Victoria looked up. Good morning, Lily. This is Gerald. She set him on the counter. I remember Gerald. Lily smiled. Then, in what Mason could only describe as the diplomatic equivalent of a frontal assault. Do you want to eat breakfast with us? Victoria glanced at Mason, who shrugged faintly. Your call, and back at Lily. Sure, she said, if I'm not in the way. You're not in the way? Lily said, with the confidence of someone who has decided the matter is settled. Daddy makes good eggs. Do you like eggs? I do. Scrambled or fried? Scrambled. Same as me, Lily said, satisfied, as if this confirmed something important. Mason made eggs. Victoria closed her laptop. He watched her across the counter while he cooked. Not intrusively, just the ordinary peripheral awareness of a small kitchen. And what he noticed was that she was different with Lily than she was with him. Not warmer exactly, but less defended. Lily asked questions the way children do, direct and without the social anxiety that makes adults hedge everything, and Victoria answered them with a plainness that seemed to catch her off guard, as if the questions were pulling responses out of her before she'd had time to decide what she was going to give away. Do you have kids? Lily asked. No. Do you want them? Lily, Mason said. It's okay, Victoria said. She looked at Lily. I don't know. I hadn't thought about it much until recently. Lily considered this with great seriousness. I think you'd be good at it, she said. You're calm. Calm people are good at kids. Victoria made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. Thank you, she said. I think. The eggs were done. Mason put plates in front of both of them and made Lily's toast and poured himself coffee and sat down at the end of the table. And for a few minutes there was just the ordinary noise of breakfast, forks and conversation, and Lily telling Victoria about a book she was reading at school, about a girl who found a horse, and Victoria listening in the careful way of someone who is actually listening and not just waiting for their turn to talk. He caught himself thinking that it felt normal. The thought unsettled him, so he finished his eggs and changed the subject in his head and went to work. The professional sorting out was not going well. He could tell without her telling him, which she didn't, at least not directly. What he could see was the laptop always open, the phone calls she took outside regardless of the temperature, the small tightening around her eyes at dinner when she mentioned having calls that afternoon and then didn't say how they'd gone. She was working on something, building towards something, and it was hard and not going the way she'd planned, and she bore it with a self-containment that he respected and that, in certain moments, worried him in a way he wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging. He found out more than she intended on a Thursday evening, about 2 weeks in. Lily was in bed. Victoria was at the kitchen table with 3 legal pads covered in her handwriting and a glass of water she hadn't touched, staring at something on her laptop with an expression that was just barely controlled. Mason came in from checking the back door and almost turned around again, some instinct telling him this was a private moment he was intruding on. But she heard him and looked up. Sorry, she said. I'll clear this. You don't have to. I'm taking over the kitchen. Victoria, you're fine. He went to the refrigerator, got out a leftover container. You eaten? A beet. Not yet. He looked at her. That's a no. I had calls this afternoon. I lost track. He warmed up the leftover chili without asking and put a bowl in front of her. She looked at it, then at him. I'm not, she started. I know you can take care of yourself, he said, sitting down across from her. I'm just pointing out that it's 9:30 and you forgot to eat and the chili's right there. She picked up the spoon. After the first bite, he could see some of the tension leave her shoulders, the way it does when a body gets what it needs and can stop spending energy on not noticing that it needs it. It's good, she said. It's Tuesday's chili. Gets better by Thursday, theoretically. She almost smiled, ate more. He stayed where he was, not pushing anything, and after a while she said, without looking up from the bowl, I had a board hearing last month. He waited. The company I ran? Hale Strategy Group. I founded it 8 years ago, built it from nothing. She said it factually, not with pride or bitterness, just as a statement of record. 12 employees, good people. We had one bad quarter, and 2 of my investors used it as a pretext to push through a board restructuring. They'd been planning it before the quarter was even over. I found that out afterward. She paused. They removed me from my own company, technically legal, professionally. She stopped. They told me I'd get a severance package and a quiet exit. The package had language in it that would have prevented me from working in my own industry for 2 years. You didn't sign it. No. She looked at her chili. That's what the calls are about. I'm fighting the non-compete language, and I'm trying to. She exhaled. I'm building something new. Same work, my own terms. But there are people from my former board who are making calls to contacts I'd been working with for years, telling them things. She set down the spoon. I'm not fragile. I've dealt with difficult situations, but this. Something moved through her face, honest and unguarded in a way he didn't think she'd intended. This was people I trusted, people I thought I knew. Mason said nothing for a moment. He thought about what to say and decided against most of it. I'm sorry, he said. That's a lousy thing. It's business, she said. And then quieter. I keep telling myself that. Is it working? A long pause. Some days more than others. He nodded. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car went by on Darrow Street, headlights sweeping briefly across the window. The people making calls to your contacts, he said. Can they actually stop you from building something new? They can make it harder, slow things down. She picked up the spoon again. They can't stop me. I won't let them stop me. She said it with a quiet flatness that he believed entirely. Okay, he said. You believe that? Yeah, he said. I do. He meant it without qualifiers, without the kind of reassurance that's really just people being nice. He'd watched her for 2 weeks now, watched her sit at that table at 6 a.m. with her laptop and her coffee and her careful, methodical work through a situation that would have broken a lot of people's concentration. He believed it because he'd seen evidence for it. She looked at him for a moment. You don't know me well enough to believe that. I know you well enough, he said. Something happened in her eyes then, a quick, undefended thing, gone almost before it arrived, but he caught it. She looked back at her bowl. The chili really is good, she said. Tuesday, Thursday window. That's the peak. She finished the bowl, cleared it herself, washed it, set it in the rack. He watched her move around his kitchen with the ease she'd developed over 2 weeks, knowing where the dish soap was, knowing the hot tap ran cold for 30 seconds before it evened out. It was a small thing, that kind of familiarity, but small things accumulated. He thought about that on his way to bed and told himself to stop. Mrs. Petrov said nothing about Victoria's presence for 11 days, which was a record for Mrs. Petrov. On the 12th day, she appeared at Mason's door with a container of borscht and an expression of elaborate casualness that fooled neither of them. Victoria was out. She had a meeting in Columbus that she'd driven down for, which had generated in Lily a series of questions about when she was coming back that she'd asked with a studied nonchalance that didn't fool Mason either. And Mason was home early for once, doing the laundry and trying to figure out where Lily's left sneaker had gone. He let Mrs. Petrov in. She put the borscht on the counter and stood there for a moment. The woman, she said. Victoria. She is staying here. She is. She is. Mrs. Petrov made a gesture that might have meant living here, or might have meant something more. It was hard to tell. How long? Few more weeks, maybe a month. She's got some work things to sort out. Work things. Mrs. Petrov said this as if testing the flavor of it. She seems, she paused, careful. Yeah, not cold, careful. There's a difference. Yeah, Mason said. There is. Mrs. Petrov looked at him with the particular look that she had developed over 11 years of watching him make decisions. Not judgment, exactly. More like attention. The look of someone keeping close watch on something that matters to them. Lily likes her, she said. Lily likes everyone. Lily likes everyone, yes, but with this one she is... Mrs. Petrov thought about it. She checks. At dinner, she checks to see if Victoria is eating. She didn't do that with anyone before. Mason didn't say anything. You like her, Mrs. Petrov said. Elena. It is an observation, not an accusation. She adjusted the borscht container. I just want to say, the careful ones, the ones who hold everything very tight. She touched her own chest briefly. They are not cold, they are... She searched for the word. Protecting something. And when they let you in, it is... She made a small, definitive gesture. It means more. That's all. She left before he could figure out how to respond to that. The conversation stayed with him through the evening, through helping Lily with her reading homework, through the somewhat chaotic dinner he'd made involving a recipe he'd been optimistic about, and a result that was edible but not what the recipe had implied. And it was still with him, sitting somewhere in the back of his chest, when he heard Victoria's car in the driveway at 8:45. She came in with color in her face from the cold and something different in her eyes. Something slightly brighter than it had been that morning. Not happiness exactly. More like the first small sign of momentum after a long stillness. "How'd it go?" Lily asked from the couch, where she was supposed to be doing her reading, but was clearly monitoring the door. Victoria hung up her coat. "Better than expected," she said. And then, as if that admission had slipped out before she'd decided to allow it, "I might have a meeting next week with someone who wants to hear my pitch." "That's good?" Lily asked. "That's good," Victoria confirmed. Lily went back to her book with the satisfied air of someone who has received a satisfactory report. Victoria looked at Mason, who was in the kitchen doorway. "There's borscht," he said. "Mrs. Petrov brought it. It's on the stove." "Did she—" Victoria stopped. "Was she checking on me?" "She was checking on me," Mason said. "You just happened to come up." Victoria's mouth curved slightly. She went into the kitchen. He heard the click of the stove burner, the sound of a cabinet opening. She knew which one the bowls were in now. He went back to the living room and sat down next to Lily on the couch and picked up her reading book and checked where she'd stopped. "She seems better tonight," Lily said, not looking up from Gerald, who she was currently redressing in a doll jacket that she'd decided suited him. "Yeah," Mason said. "I think she is." "Good." Lily looked up at him, serious in the way she sometimes got, the way that always made him hold still. "She works really hard, Daddy." "I know. Like you do. The same kind of trying hard." She studied him with Frank Brooks' eyes. "You both look the same when you're tired." He looked at his daughter and thought about what you were supposed to say to that. "Time for bed," he said. Lily made the customary protest. He did the customary negotiation. The book got finished, the teeth got brushed, Gerald got arranged in his place by the pillow. He sat on the edge of Lily's bed in the dark for a minute, the way he did every night, because she'd asked him to when she was 3 and he'd never stopped. "Daddy," Lily said. "Yeah." "Are you glad you stopped that night? On the road?" He thought about the highway, the hazard lights, the woman standing in the cold with her arms crossed and her inadequate coat, and her, "I'm fine, that wasn't quite true." "Yeah," he said. "I'm glad I stopped." Lily made a small, satisfied sound and closed her eyes. He sat there a minute longer in the dark, listening to the house settle, and from the kitchen he could hear the faint sound of Victoria moving around, putting her bowl in the sink, running water, the quiet, ordinary sounds of someone who had learned where things were and how they worked, someone who had, slowly, without announcing it, in the modest daily way that real things tend to happen, started to belong. He noticed it, and this time he didn't tell himself to stop. The meeting in Columbus went well enough that there was a second one. Victoria didn't say much about it at dinner. She mentioned it the way she mentioned most things about her work, in the brief, contained manner of someone who had learned not to count on things before they materialized. But Mason noticed she'd been at the kitchen table an hour earlier than usual that morning with a fresh legal pad, and the handwriting across the top of the first page was different from her normal, careful print. Faster, more urgent, the way people write when they're finally writing things they mean. He noticed and said nothing and made Lily's lunch and went to work. What was happening in the house on Darrow Street was the kind of thing that doesn't have a clean moment of beginning. It accumulated the way weather does, pressure building without announcement, until one day you look up and realize the sky has changed entirely. Victoria had been there 5 weeks. The spare room had taken on the subtle geography of habitation. A stack of books on the dresser, a second coffee mug that she'd bought herself and that had silently become her mug, a small plant on the windowsill that Lily had given her from the windowsill collection she kept in her room, pressing it on Victoria with the solemnity of a formal gift. "It's a succulent," Lily had told her. "They don't need much water. They're independent." Victoria had looked at the plant and then at Lily. "Are you telling me I'm like a succulent?" "I'm saying it'll do fine even if you forget about it sometimes," Lily said. "Which is good, because you're busy." Victoria had laughed. a real one, surprised out of her, shorter than a full laugh, but genuine, and put the plant on the windowsill. The plant was still there. It had not died. Mason considered this, irrationally, a good sign about something, though he couldn't have said exactly what. He was looking at it one morning when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Not a call. A text from his friend Danny Kowalski, who worked with him at Harlan Fabrication and was one of 3 people Mason would call if he were in serious trouble and needed someone to show up without being asked. The text said, "Still on for Saturday?" They'd had a standing tradition for 6 years. Saturday morning coffee at a diner on the east side of town, the kind of place with vinyl booths and a counter and a cook named Phil who remembered everyone's order. Mason and Danny. Sometimes another friend, Joe, when he could get away from his family's Saturday commitments. It was a simple, low-maintenance ritual, the kind Mason had come to depend on without quite realizing how much. He texted back, "Yeah, I'll be there." Danny was already in the booth when Mason got there. Navy fleece, coffee in hand, 3 packets of sugar torn open and lined up with the precision of a man who had opinions about coffee to sugar ratios. He had a broad, blunt face and the manner of someone who said what he thought and didn't especially enjoy it when other people didn't return the favor. "You look like you haven't slept," Danny said, by way of greeting. "Good morning to you, too." "Seriously, you look tired, different kind of tired than usual." Mason slid into the booth and flagged down the waitress. "I sleep fine." "You sleep fine," Danny repeated, in the tone of someone filing this claim under disputed. He wrapped both hands around his mug. "How's the situation?" Mason looked at him. "What situation?" "The woman, the CEO, the one living in your spare room." She's a tenant, paying rent." "Uh-huh." "She had nowhere to go. Her car broke down. It was—" "Mason, I know the story." "I'm asking how the situation is." Danny looked at him the way he'd been looking at him since they were 22 and sharing an apartment, and Danny had been the one to tell him, gently but directly, that he needed to stop waiting around for things to change and start changing them. 5 weeks, he said. "She's been there 5 weeks." "I know how long she's been here." "And?" "And nothing. She's working on rebuilding her business. She pays rent on time. She doesn't leave dishes in the sink." He paused. "Lily likes her." "Lily likes everyone." "That's what I said." "And yet." Mason looked at his coffee. Phil's daughter, a 20-something named Becca, refilled it without being asked, which was one of the reasons this diner was worth the drive. He wrapped his hands around the mug. "She's going through something hard," he said. "These people she trusted basically took her company from her, and she's trying to rebuild, and she's doing it without—" He stopped. "She doesn't complain. She gets up every morning and works, and she still shows up for dinner. She still sits with Lily and actually listens to her. And I don't know how she does that when she's carrying—" "Mason," Danny said it quietly. Mason looked up. "If she weren't there anymore," Danny said, "if she got back on her feet tomorrow and moved out, would you be relieved or would you—" "Don't," Mason said. "I'm asking. I know what you're asking, so answer it." The diner was full of Saturday morning noise, booth conversations and coffee cups and Phil's running commentary from behind the counter about something related to the weather. Mason watched a couple at the next table share a piece of pie, each using their own fork, without either of them remarking on it. The casual, unself-conscious intimacy of it. He looked back at Danny. "I don't know," he said, which was not entirely true. He knew. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud in a vinyl booth at 8:30 on a Saturday morning, because saying it out loud made it real, and real things could go wrong in real ways, and he had a 6-year-old daughter at home who had already given a stranded stranger her most important stuffed rabbit. Danny studied him for a long moment. "She know how you feel?" "There's nothing to know. I haven't said anything. I'm not going to say anything." "Why not?" "Because she's in the middle of a crisis," Mason said. "Because she's staying in my spare room out of necessity, and the moment that stops being necessary, she's going to leave. And if I say anything before that, He stopped. "It's complicated. You're afraid she'll only stay because she feels like she owes you," Danny said. Mason looked at him. "Don't make it sound that simple." "I'm not making it sound simple. I'm saying what it is." Danny drank his coffee. That's actually not a simple thing. That's a pretty thoughtful thing to be worried about. He paused. But it's also a convenient thing to hide behind. Mason didn't say anything. I'm not telling you to do anything, Danny said. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself about what you actually want. Because Lily's in that house, and she's 6, and she's already attached, and you know that. And you need to know what you're actually... He stopped himself. Forget it. I'm not her father. You are. No, say it. I'm saying be careful what you let grow in front of your daughter before you know what it's going to become, Danny said. That's all. That's the whole thing. He put his mug down. Now can we talk about something else, because this is making my coffee taste bad. They talked about something else, but Mason drove home with the conversation sitting in his chest like a stone that had been placed there carefully by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He found the notebook by accident, and he would spend a long time afterward going back and forth on whether he should have read what he read. It was a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the diner, and Victoria had been gone since early morning. A full-day situation in Columbus, multiple meetings. She'd texted him in the morning to say she might be late and not to hold dinner, which was a text she'd never sent before, and which Lily had received with a disproportionate level of philosophical disappointment that she'd worked through by the time dessert came around. He'd cleaned up after dinner, helped Lily with her bath and her book and the elaborate Gerald placement ritual, and then gone to do the laundry. Victoria's room was the one closest to the laundry closet. The door was open. He knocked anyway, out of habit, before going to get the basket. Lily had a way of leaving socks on the floor in there sometimes, and it was in looking for the basket in the dimness that he saw the notebook on the desk. It was open. He wasn't trying to read it. He was trying to see in the dark without turning on the light, and the notebook was open to a page near the middle, and his eyes went to it the way eyes go to text. He caught a line before he decided whether he wanted to. He straightened up, basket in hand, and stood there for a moment. Then, and this was the decision he'd interrogate later, the one he'd turn over and examine from all angles, he stepped closer and read the page. It wasn't a journal entry. It was a list, in her clean, precise handwriting, organized under a heading that said, "Where I'm going," with the date at the top. Below it, a series of items, most crossed out. Reestablish client contacts, crossed out with a decisive single line. Resolve non-compete language, crossed out. Identify funding for new venture, half crossed out. An asterisk beside it. Find permanent housing, not crossed out. And then, lower on the page, a line that was not a goal but a question, written in slightly different ink, as if added at a different moment. What is this between us? Is it real, or is it only because I need it to be? He stood there reading that line for a long time. He put the basket down outside the laundry closet, went to the kitchen, and stood at the sink looking at the window above it that showed nothing but his own reflection in the dark glass. His face looked like the face of a man who'd just been handed something heavy and wasn't sure whether to hold it or put it down. She got home at 9:45. He heard the car, heard the door, heard her moving in the entryway. He was still in the kitchen. She came in, registered him at the counter, registered the expression on his face. "What happened?" she said immediately. "Is Lily—" "Lily's fine. She's asleep." He turned around. "How were the meetings?" "Fine." She set her bag down, watching him. "You look... What's wrong?" He turned back to the window. Outside, a neighbor's porch light was on across the street, just visible through the bare branches of the oak tree in the yard. He stayed there for a moment, looking at it. "I went to get the laundry basket from your room," he said. "The door was open. I saw the notebook on your desk." He paused. "I should have looked away, and I didn't. I'm sorry." He heard her go still. "What did you see?" Her voice was careful, not angry, careful. "The page with the goals list." He turned around. She was standing at the end of the kitchen counter with her coat still on and her bag strapped over her shoulder, and her face had gone to the place it went when she was processing something she hadn't prepared for. "I saw all of it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she put her bag on the counter and took off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. Deliberate movements, the kind people make when they need to do something with their hands. "Which part," she said, "are you talking about?" "The question at the bottom of the page." A silence. The refrigerator hummed, Outside, wind moved through the oak tree. That was... She stopped. Started again. I wasn't... She pressed her lips together and looked at the counter, and something happened in her face that he'd never seen before. A crack, small and unwilling, in the careful surface she kept maintained. I write things down, she said, when I don't know what to do with them. It doesn't necessarily mean... Victoria. She looked up. I don't want you here because you need somewhere to stay, he said. I've known that for a while. I wasn't going to say it because the timing is wrong and the situation is... He stopped. But I read your notebook and I think you deserve an honest answer to an honest question, even if you wrote it down instead of asking me. She was very still. The kind of still that's not absence of movement, but active management of movement. It's real, he said. For me, whatever it is. He held her gaze. I don't know what it is for you, and you don't have to tell me, but I wanted you to know that what you wrote, the question, the answer on my side is, it's real, and I know the difference. Victoria stood there. The silence was long and complicated. Mason, her voice came out slightly rougher than usual. I have been systematically betrayed by the people I was closest to, professionally, and before that, she stopped. I have a long history of mistaking what people want from me for something else, of thinking things were more than they were and being wrong. She looked at her hands on the counter. And I am in your house, in your spare room, at your table, and Lily... Something moved through her face when she said Lily's name. She controlled it. I do not want to be another thing that happens to this family and then goes away. I know, he said. I don't think you fully understand what I understand that you're scared, he said, and I understand why. And I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you where I am so that you have accurate information. He paused. That's all. I'm not trying to back you into anything. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were doing the complicated thing again, the thing that wasn't crying but was in the same territory. That's very, She stopped. Most people don't do that. Say exactly what they mean without wanting something back immediately. My dad thought wanting something back immediately was the fastest way to not get what you actually wanted. He exhaled. Or maybe he just said that so I'd be patient. I was never sure. Something happened to her expression. The kind of thing that's technically a small movement but carries enormous weight. A softening. Not surrender. Nothing as simple as that. Something more like a door opening an inch, just an inch, because the person on the other side had knocked the right way. I'm not ready, she said. I don't know what I am yet. I know who I was, who I built myself to be, and I don't know if that's still... She stopped again. I'm trying to figure out what I'm building, what I'm going to be when this is over. Okay, he said. Okay? Yeah, okay. He picked up his coffee mug, found it empty, put it in the sink. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is the question. It'll still be there when you have an answer. He looked at her. Just so you know, what you're building, the new thing, I think it's going to be better than what they took. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't know that, she said. No, he said, but I've watched you work for 5 weeks. I've got a pretty good data set. This time what happened to her face was definitely almost a smile. That's very analytical of you. I'm a problem solver. It's what I do. She looked at him for a beat longer, then she turned and picked up her bag. I'm going to go change, she said, and then I want tea. Is there tea? Third cabinet on the left, behind the coffee. Thank you. She walked past him toward the hallway. At the door she paused, her back still to him. Mason? Yeah. The question at the bottom of the page. She didn't turn around. I wrote it because I already suspected the answer. I just didn't... She stopped. I wasn't sure what to do with it yet. She went down the hallway. He stood in the kitchen and listened to her door close softly, and then the quiet that followed. And he felt something loosen in his chest that had been wound tight for long enough that he'd stopped noticing the tension. He filled the kettle and put it on the stove. Lily came padding out at 10 o'clock, which she was absolutely not supposed to do, in her owl pajamas with Gerald under her arm. She stopped in the kitchen doorway, took in the scene, Mason at the stove, the kettle going, 2 mugs on the counter, and said with the comprehensive situational awareness of a child who misses nothing, "Is she home?" "She's home. She's changing." Lily looked at the two mugs. "Are you having tea together?" "I think so, yeah." Lily processed this, gave him a long look. Then she turned and went back down the hallway without comment, in the serene manner of someone whose expectations have been confirmed and who does not need to make a production of it. He heard her door close. He stood at the stove and watched the kettle and thought about Danny's question. Would you be relieved? And thought about the answer he hadn't given, the one he'd known even then, sitting in that vinyl booth. He thought about the notebook page and the question written in different ink, added later in a different moment, after something had shifted enough to make the question necessary. He thought about his father, who used to say that most of the important things in life arrived sideways, not through the front door, planned and expected, but through some unaccounted for angle, usually at the worst possible time, usually when you were in no position to receive them well, and that the whole skill of living was learning to be ready anyway. The kettle started its low whistle. From down the hallway came the sound of Victoria's door opening, and then her footsteps on the hardwood. And then she was in the kitchen doorway, in different clothes now, her hair loose, and she looked different than she had 5 weeks ago in this same kitchen, different in a way he couldn't have articulated precisely, less like someone passing through, and more like someone who had, without announcing it, started to arrive. "Tea ready?" she asked. "Nearly," he said. She came in and got the mugs from the counter and set them by the stove, and they stood there together while the kettle finished, not saying anything, the kitchen warm and quiet around them. It was not the beginning of anything dramatic. It was just two people standing in a kitchen at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night waiting for water to boil, which is one of the least cinematic things in the world. And yet Mason Brooks, who was 32 and tired in the particular way of single fathers and sheet metal workers, and people who had been holding things together alone for a long time, stood there in the warmth and the quiet and felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like something was about to be okay. Not everything, not all at once, not in the smooth, clean way of stories where problems resolve themselves neatly, but something real, something worth the waiting. The kettle came to a full boil, and he poured the water, and outside on Darrow Street the February wind was blowing cold through the oak tree, and Lily was in her room with Gerald in the dark, already asleep again, already dreaming about whatever 6-year-olds dream about when the people they love are safe in the same house. The non-compete language got resolved on a Thursday in late March. Victoria came home that evening and said nothing about it at dinner. She talked to Lily about a book Lily was reading, asked Mason about a problem he'd mentioned at the fabrication shop involving a contractor who kept changing the specs mid-installation, listened to his answer with the focused attention she gave to things that actually interested her. Only after Lily was in bed did she come back to the kitchen, where Mason was finishing the dishes, and say without preamble, "My attorney called this afternoon. They dropped the restrictive clause." Mason turned around. "All of it?" "All of it. They kept some confidentiality language around specific client contracts, which is reasonable, and I agreed to that." She leaned against the doorframe. "I can work. Fully. Without limitation." "Victoria." "I know." She said it quietly, with the restrained quality of someone who has been holding something clenched for a very long time and is only now, cautiously, beginning to release it. "I know." He dried his hands on the dish towel. "We should do something. Dinner, at least. Somewhere that isn't here." She looked around the kitchen, the stack of Lily's drawings on the counter, the coffee maker that had become as familiar to her as her own breathing, the window above the sink where the oak tree's new March growth was just barely visible in the dark. "Here is fine," she said. Here is good." He understood what she meant. He didn't push. But something had shifted after that Wednesday night in the kitchen, the tea and the conversation, and the things she'd said before she'd gone down the hallway. I wasn't sure what to do with it yet. And the shift wasn't dramatic, wasn't the sudden rearrangement of everything, but was instead the kind of incremental change that you track by accumulation. She sat closer at the kitchen table now. She asked about his day and meant it, the follow-up questions going 3 or 4 exchanges deep, the way someone does when they're genuinely interested in the answer. She'd started, without comment, folding Lily's laundry when she found it in the dryer, leaving it in a neat pile on the counter, nothing said about it, just a thing done. He'd noticed. He'd said nothing, because saying something would have made it self-conscious, and the value of it was precisely that it was unself-conscious. Lily noticed too, because Lily noticed everything. One evening, she came and sat beside Victoria on the couch, while Victoria was reviewing a document, and instead of talking, which was usually Lily's preferred mode of existence, she just sat there, leaning very slightly against Victoria's arm, reading her own book. And Victoria had let her, had adjusted her position almost imperceptibly to accommodate the small weight of the child beside her, had kept reading her document. Mason had been standing in the doorway and had not said anything, had gone back to the kitchen and stood there for a moment doing nothing in particular, feeling the house around him the way you feel a room change temperature, gradually, then all at once. The new venture had a name by the first week of April, Hale Consulting Partners, which was not a particularly revolutionary name, but which Victoria had chosen deliberately, keeping her name on it, planting her flag in the ground she'd been forced off of. She had 2 clients signed, a regional medical supplier looking to restructure its procurement strategy, and a mid-sized tech firm that needed help repositioning after a failed acquisition. Not a full load. A beginning. She told him over breakfast on a Saturday, with Lily between them eating her cereal and occasionally inserting commentary about the cartoon she'd watched earlier that had absolutely nothing to do with the conversation and everything to do with Lily making sure she was part of it. 2 clients, Victoria said. The retainer covers my basic operating costs plus a salary for me that's... She paused. Modest, compared to what I was making. Compared to what you were making at the company that took your company, Mason said. She looked at him. Yes. Is it enough? It's enough, she said. For now it's enough. She drank her coffee. I've been looking at apartments in Whitmore. There are a couple of 2-bedrooms that are reasonable, and I have enough for first and last month now, and... Lily put her spoon down. You're leaving? She said it with the flat, direct impact of a child who has not yet developed the instinct to soften things with tone, and the word leaving landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a height. Victoria looked at her. Something moved through her face. Not surprise because she'd known this would come, but something else, something less managed. I have my own work now, she said carefully. I need my own space to run a business. I need an office, and you could use the spare room, Lily said. It's right there. Lily, Mason said. It is right there, Lily said, looking at him with the expression she used when she was being strictly factual and didn't understand why facts were complicated. And she knows where things are now. Mason looked at his daughter. Then at Victoria, who was looking at Lily with the expression she used when she didn't know what to do with something, which meant it had gotten past her defenses, which meant it was real. I know where things are, Victoria said. That's... yes. She picked up her coffee, put it down. But I need to stand on my own, Lily. Do you understand? I need to know I can. Lily thought about this with genuine seriousness. Okay, she said. Then, but that doesn't mean you have to go far. Nobody said anything after that for a moment. Cereal's getting soggy, Mason said. Lily picked up her spoon and ate her cereal. He drove Victoria to look at 2 of the apartments that weekend because she'd mentioned the addresses and he knew the buildings and told her which one had a parking situation that was actually functional and which one had a landlord with a reputation in the neighborhood for being slow on maintenance. She'd written this down in the small notebook she kept in her bag. Not the leather one with the goals list, a newer one, blue cover, with a methodical efficiency she brought to everything she considered worth keeping track of. The apartment she chose was on the 3rd floor of a building on Morrow Street, about 4 miles from Darrow Street, which was not far. 2 bedrooms, one of which would serve as an office. New enough appliances, decent light, a parking spot included in the rent. She signed the lease on a Tuesday afternoon and told Mason over dinner that evening. Lily received this information, looked at her pasta and said, When? 2 weeks, Victoria said. The 1st of May. Lily nodded. 8. Then, can we help you move? You don't have... Can we? Lily pressed. Not aggressive, just persistent in the particular Lily way. Victoria looked at her. The complicated, quiet thing happened in her face. Yes, she said. If you want. I want, Lily said, satisfied, and went back to her pasta. After dinner, after Lily was in bed, Victoria stayed at the kitchen table longer than usual. Mason was doing a crossword at the other end of the table, an actual newspaper crossword, a habit his mother had given him, and the kitchen was quiet and warm, and the window showed the spring night outside, the oak tree in leaf now, the porch light of the house across the street making a small orange circle in the dark. I want to say something, Victoria said. He looked up. About the last 3 months. She had her hands flat on the table, a posture he'd come to recognize as her deliberate honesty position. I came here because I had no options. You know that. I knew it. And I treated it like a transaction I was going to get through as quickly as possible and not owe anyone anything. I know, he said. I was wrong. She said it plainly, without drama. Not about needing to be independent. That part's right. I do need that. But about this. About you. She looked at the table. I've been trying to figure out since that Wednesday night whether what I feel is real, or whether it's gratitude or circumstance, or whether I'm just... She stopped. I have a history of confusing what I feel with what I need, and I didn't want to do that again. And? He said. She looked up at him. And I'm moving 4 miles away, and every time I think about the distance, I feel something that has nothing to do with gratitude and nothing to do with circumstance. A beat. I think that's probably an answer. Mason set down his pen. He looked at her across the table, the careful, self-contained woman who had stood on a frozen highway in inadequate shoes and said, I'm fine before he'd opened his mouth, who had eaten soup in this kitchen at midnight and who had sat on this couch with his daughter leaning against her arm and hadn't moved away, who had written a question in the back of a notebook in different ink because she'd added it later, after something had changed. Yeah, he said. That's probably an answer. I'm not... She exhaled. I'm not saying I have everything figured out. I don't. I'm building something and it's early, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't complicated. I know it's complicated. And Lily... Her voice shifted slightly on Lily's name, the way it always did. She can't be... I can't be a rehearsal for someone else in her life. If I'm in, I have to actually be in. And I'm not going to commit to something and then... She stopped. I need to be sure. So be sure, he said. Take however long you need. I told you the question wasn't going anywhere. She looked at him for a long moment. You're very calm about things. I've had practice, he said. Single father. You develop a tolerance for not being able to control outcomes. Something shifted in her expression, something warm. Is that your version of romantic? I'm working up to romantic, he said. I'm currently at honest. She laughed. The real one, the surprised one, the one she couldn't control. He'd been collecting those. This one was better than most. Honest is good, she said. Honest is... Yes, that's what I need. She got up, took her glass to the sink, stood there for a moment looking at the window the way she'd stood there that first night, the night she'd come back from Columbus with the first good news in months. Then she turned around and walked back toward the kitchen doorway and stopped and looked at him. Mason. Quiet. Yeah. If I come over for dinner on Friday. She said it with the deliberateness of someone choosing every word. Not because I need to, just because I want to. Then come for dinner on Friday, he said. She nodded once. Okay. She looked at him one more time with the careful, specific attention she gave to things that mattered to her. Good night. Night. She went down the hallway. He sat at the kitchen table for a while longer, the crossword abandoned, the house quiet around him. Moving day was on a Saturday, the 1st of May, and Lily had appointed herself logistics coordinator in a way that nobody had asked for and nobody could have stopped. She arrived in the spare room at 8 a.m. with the list she'd written herself. He hadn't even known she'd made a list, and proceeded to direct the carrying of boxes with the authority of someone who had given this substantial thought. That one's books, she informed Mason, pointing at a box. Books are heavy. That's a 2-person box. I know books are heavy, Lily. I'm just saying. Victoria stood in the doorway of the spare room watching this, and the expression on her face was the kind that costs something. Not painful, but full. The way a thing can be full when it's almost more than you know how to hold. She'd packed methodically, the way she did everything, labeling each box in her clear handwriting. Office supplies, kitchen, bedroom, files. The room looked smaller with her things in boxes. The star stickers were still on the windowsill. The plant was already in the car. Danny showed up with his truck at 9 because Mason had called him, and Danny had said yeah, of course, without asking a single question, which was why Danny was one of 3 people Mason would call in a genuine emergency. He met Victoria in the living room, shook her hand, said, "Danny Kowalski, I've heard a lot about you," which Mason had not told him to say, and which earned him a look. "Is that right?" Victoria said, and looked at Mason. "He means I mentioned you," Mason said. "A lot," Danny confirmed helpfully. Victoria looked at Danny with the expression of someone recalculating. Then she almost smiled. "Good to meet you, Danny." "Yeah, you too." He picked up a box. "Books box?" "Two-person box," Lily said from the hallway. "Kid's right," Danny said to no one in particular, and went to get Mason. It took 3 hours, which was longer than Mason had estimated, and shorter than it could have been, considering that Lily dropped a box of kitchen supplies on the stairs and one of Victoria's mugs. Not her mug, one of the others, didn't survive it. Victoria looked at the pieces on the stair landing and said, "It's fine," in the same flat tone she'd used that first night on the highway, and Lily crouched down and picked up the pieces with a carefully controlled expression of personal guilt, and Victoria crouched down beside her and said, "Lily, it's a mug. It's okay." And Lily looked at her with enormous eyes and said, "I broke your thing." And Victoria said, "You helped me move my entire life in 3 hours. We're very much ahead." And Lily processed this and nodded and handed her the largest piece of the mug, and Victoria took it and threw it away without further ceremony. Danny caught Mason's eye across the landing and said nothing, which was the correct response. The new apartment smelled like fresh paint and the specific emptiness of a space that hadn't been lived in yet. Lily walked through it with the systematic thoroughness of an inspector, opening cabinet doors and reporting on what she found. Danny and Mason got the furniture in, which took another hour, and then Danny made his excuses. He had a thing, his girlfriend, a thing he'd probably made up, Mason thought, to give them room, and left. Victoria stood in the middle of her new living room, surrounded by boxes, hands on her hips, looking at the arrangement of furniture with the expression she used when she was evaluating whether something was workable. The afternoon light came through the windows and fell across the floor, and the room looked like a beginning, which was what it was. "It's good," she said. Yes. It's good." "It's good," Mason agreed. Lily appeared from the direction of what would be the office. "The second bedroom has good light," she announced. "Good for a desk. I put your plant on the windowsill." Victoria looked at her. "You put the plant in there?" "It needs the light," Lily said simply. "You forget to water it. Light helps." "Lily," Mason said. "It's true," Lily said. "It's true," Victoria confirmed. She looked at the plant, now visible through the open office door on the windowsill, small and stubborn in its pot. She looked at Lily. Something happened in her face, the full complicated thing, the one that cost something. She crouched down to Lily's level. She'd started doing this a few weeks back, meeting her at her height, and said, "Thank you for taking care of it." "The succulent," Lily said. "The succulent," Victoria agreed. "Independent," Lily said, "but not alone." Victoria looked at her for a long moment. The afternoon light was in both their faces. Mason stood by the window and watched and did not say anything. "No," Victoria said softly. "Not alone." Lily nodded, satisfied with the world's arrangement, and went back to exploring the apartment. Victoria stood up, and when she turned to face Mason, her eyes were doing the thing that wasn't crying but was right there beside it, and she looked at him with an expression that was done trying to be careful, that had simply, in this particular moment, run out of careful. "She's extraordinary," she said. "She's 6, he said. "She gets it from her grandfather." "And her father?" He shook his head. "Her grandfather." She looked at him steadily. "Mason, take the credit. He almost smiled. She's pretty extraordinary, he agreed. They ordered pizza because nobody was cooking after a day of moving boxes, and they ate it on the floor of Victoria's new living room because her kitchen table wasn't assembled yet. Lily sat cross-legged with a slice in each hand and informed them at length about the plot of the horse book she'd finally finished, which resolved, apparently, with the girl and the horse both learning to trust people again after being let down. And Lily delivered this plot summary with the unconscious precision of a child who has absolutely no idea she's describing something else entirely. Victoria listened to all of it with her legs crossed and her back against the wall, and her pizza in her hand and her eyes on Lily, and Mason watched her listening, and what he saw in her face was not the careful managed attention she'd started with. It was the real thing, simple and unguarded and present in a way that required nothing from her. It just was. He ate his pizza and let the evening be what it was. Later, when Lily had fallen asleep on Victoria's couch, she'd announced she wasn't tired and been unconscious within 20 minutes, which was a number Mason could have predicted. He and Victoria sat on the floor in the kitchen doorway with the last of the pizza and the particular quiet of a day that had been full and was now winding down. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Being here." She looked around at the boxes and the bare walls and the empty space that would take time to become something. "Strange," she said honestly. "Right. Both." "Good strange or bad strange?" "Good strange." She looked at him. "It's mine. That matters." She paused. "I didn't realize how much until I didn't have it." He nodded. "Yeah. I'm going to put everything back," she said. Not to him exactly, more like saying it aloud because saying it aloud made it real. The career, the stability, all of it. On my own terms this time. She picked at the edge of the pizza box. "I needed someone to believe that was possible before I could believe it myself. Which I know is, She stopped. "I know it sounds like I couldn't do it alone." "No," he said. "It sounds like you're a person. People need other people to believe in them sometimes. That's not weakness. That's just how it works." She looked at him. "You make it sound simple." "My dad said most things are simpler than we make them," he said. "Not easy, just simple." "He sounds like someone I would have liked to know." "Yeah," Mason said. "He would have liked you too." He paused. He had a thing for people who were stubborn in the right direction. The corner of her mouth moved. "Is that what I am?" "That's what you are," he said, among other things. She held his gaze. In the kitchen light, with her hair loose and her shoes off and the wall of the new apartment behind her, she looked less like the woman who'd stood on Route 9 with her arms crossed against the cold. She looked like someone who had put something down, some long-carried weight, not all of it, not all at once, but enough to stand differently, enough to notice the difference. She reached over and took his hand. Not dramatically, not with announcement, just reached over and put her hand over his where it rested on the floor, the way you do when you want to say something you don't have words for yet, when the words are still forming and the hand is faster. He turned his palm up and held on. They sat like that for a while, on the floor of her new kitchen doorway, while Lily slept on the couch in the next room, and the April night went about its business outside the windows, and the boxes waited to be unpacked, and the plant sat on the windowsill of the office room with the good light, small and alive and not going anywhere. Summer came to Darrow Street the way it always did in northern Ohio. Reluctantly at first, a few warm days in May that retreated into cold before committing. And then all at once in June, the oak tree fully leafed, the bike unchained from the porch railing and actually used now, Lily coming home in the evenings with grass-stained knees, and the particular exhausted satisfaction of a child who has spent a day doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. Victoria came for dinner on Fridays. Then Thursdays, too. Then a Wednesday here and there, when her day ran long and Morrow Street felt further away than it was, and Mason had texted something specific about what he was making. Not come to dinner, but I'm doing that chili again, the Thursday version this time, which you know is the peak. And she'd texted back a single word, coming, and shown up 40 minutes later with a bottle of something and her laptop bag and the ease of someone arriving somewhere they already knew. Hale Consulting Partners had a third client by June, a fourth by July. She hired a part-time assistant, a woman named Priya, who worked remotely and managed her scheduling and correspondence with an efficiency that Victoria described admiringly as ruthless. The retainer income was no longer modest. It was, Victoria told Mason one evening at the kitchen table on Darrow Street while Lily watched her cartoon in the next room, enough. Enough, she said. Not I'm managing enough. Actually enough. Good, he said. I'm going to hire a second consultant in the fall. Someone with financial sector experience. She tapped her pen on the legal pad. There's a woman I worked with years ago, before, at Hale Strategy, who reached out last month. She left after I did. I think she left because of what happened. She paused. I haven't called her back yet. Why not? She was quiet for a moment. Because when I see her, I'm going to have to talk about what happened again. And She stopped. I've been trying to build forward. Looking back is hard. Looking back is hard, he agreed. But not calling someone who left a company because they were loyal to you isn't building forward. That's just avoiding. She looked at him. I know, she said. I know it is. She picked up her phone, put it down. I'll call her tomorrow. Okay. She looked at him again. You're not going to let me not call her, are you? You'll do what you want, he said, but you'll feel better when you call her. You know that. She tapped the pen again, then picked up the phone and dialed. He got up quietly and went to check on Lily, giving her the room. Her name was Cass Whitmore, no relation to the town, and she joined Hale Consulting Partners in September as a senior consultant, bringing 3 clients with her that she'd continued working with independently, which gave the firm a financial sector vertical it hadn't had before, and which Victoria described to Mason, over dinner at Morrow Street on a Friday in October, as the thing that had taken it from a practice to a company. There's a difference? Mason asked. A practice is one person who's very good at something. A company is something that can exist without you. She refilled his glass. A practice dies if you get hit by a truck. A company... Can we use a different example? She looked at him. A company continues. That's better, he said. She smiled. The real one, the full one, the one that had taken months to arrive at its current frequency. It showed up regularly now, without requiring the exact right combination of circumstances. He'd watched it emerge the way you watch something come into its full season. Gradually, then all at once. He reached across the table and she took his hand and they sat there in the Morrow Street apartment that had become, over the months, fully inhabited. Bookshelves full, art on the walls, the succulent still alive on the office windowsill, 2 of Lily's drawings framed and hung in the hallway because Lily had given them with a solemnity that made refusing them impossible, and because Victoria had put them up the same day she'd received them without being asked. This was what he hadn't known, that February night on Route 9, that stopping for a stranded car would take him here. Not to a simple happiness, not to a life without complications and hard days and the ordinary ongoing difficulty of being a person, but here, to a Friday night in an apartment that had come to feel like a place he belonged, across from a woman who had arrived in his life through the worst timing and the worst circumstances, and had stayed because she'd chosen to, not because she'd had to, chose to. That was the thing. That was always the thing. He'd thought about that a lot over the year. About the difference between people who stay because they need something and people who stay because they've decided to. His ex-wife Claire had needed things. Stability, reassurance, a life that looked a certain way from the outside. And when those needs had shifted, she'd left. And he didn't blame her for it, not anymore, because she'd been honest about it in the way people are honest when they finally run out of ways to pretend. But the leaving had done something to him. Had installed in him a particular wariness about the difference between chosen and necessary. Victoria had arrived as necessary. She'd stayed as chosen. He'd watched the transition happen in real time over months, and the small daily accumulations of a person making a life rather than surviving one. That wasn't nothing. That was in fact everything. He asked her to marry him on a Sunday morning in November. He had not planned it for that specific morning. He had been thinking about it, carrying it around in his chest for weeks, the question and its implications, the ring he'd bought in October and kept in the drawer of his nightstand under a pile of instruction manuals for appliances he'd mostly lost track of. He'd been working up to a specific plan, a dinner somewhere, something properly considered, something that didn't happen in the kitchen on a Sunday morning while Lily was eating cereal and the coffee was still brewing. But Lily was eating her cereal and Victoria was standing at the counter reading something on her phone, and the morning light was coming through the kitchen window in the particular way it came through in November, low and gold, and the coffee maker was going, and Victoria was wearing his old flannel shirt over her own clothes because she'd grabbed it off the hook by the door to stay warm, and she looked like she'd been there always, like the house had arranged itself around her without anyone noticing until it was already done. He went to the bedroom and got the ring out of the drawer. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, ring in his closed hand, feeling the full weight of the decision. Not doubt, not hesitation, just the particular gravity of a thing that matters. Lily looked up from her cereal and saw his face, and whatever she saw there made her go very still, which was unusual for Lily, who was rarely still. Her eyes went to his closed hand. He walked to the counter where Victoria was standing. She looked up from her phone. "What?" she said, reading his expression. He opened his hand. The ring was simple. A solitaire, not large, plain gold band. The kind of thing she would actually wear because he'd paid attention to what she wore. Her eyes went to it and then to his face, and something happened in her expression that went through several stages very quickly. Recognition, and then the full complicated weight of what recognition meant, and then something that was not any one emotion, but was all of them at once. "Mason," she said. "I know the timing's not— I didn't have a plan for this morning," he said. "I had a whole thing, a dinner. I was going to—" He stopped. "But you're standing in my kitchen, in my shirt, and the coffee's almost done, and it seemed like the right morning." He held her gaze. "You chose this," he said. "You had everything you needed, you had somewhere else to be, and you kept choosing this. So I'm asking if you want to keep choosing it, officially, with paperwork." She stared at him. He saw her jaw move. "Paperwork," she said. "And other things," he said. "But, yeah, among them, paperwork." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost something else. "You are the least—" She stopped. "You are so—" She stopped again. "Romantic," said Lily from the counter, without looking up from her cereal. He said he was working up to it. Victoria turned and looked at Lily, then back at Mason. Something in her face broke open in the way that happens when a person has been holding something and finally lets it go. Not falling apart, not collapsing, but releasing. The way a fist opens. "Yes," she said, quiet and direct and certain. "Yes." He put the ring on her finger. It fit, which he'd managed by the undignified method of borrowing one of her rings from the bathroom counter 2 months ago and taking it to the jeweler. She looked at her hand, then at him. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him, and he held her in his kitchen on a November morning with the coffee almost done, and Lily watching with Gerald pressed to her chest with both hands, containing her feelings with visible effort. He held Victoria in his kitchen and thought about his father, who had said, "You stop. You see if you can help." The whole simple instruction for a life, compressed to one movement, one night, one frozen highway. "Okay," Lily said from the counter. "Now, can I be the flower girl?" Victoria pulled back just far enough to look at her, eyes still wet, the real kind this time, not the almost kind. "You can be whatever you want," she said. "Flower girl," Lily said immediately. "I've already thought about it a lot." "You couldn't have known." "I've thought about it a lot," Lily repeated, with the serenity of someone who has been preparing for an eventuality they considered inevitable. Victoria looked at Mason. He shrugged. "She reads a lot," he said. "She plans ahead." Victoria shook her head and looked at the ring on her hand and then at Lily and then at Mason again, and the expression on her face was not one of uncomplicated happiness. She was too complicated a person for uncomplicated happiness, and he would not have wanted her any other way. But it was something true and warm and present in a way that asked nothing more of the moment than to simply be what it was. Mrs. Petrov, when told, said, "Finally," and then produced a bottle of something from her coat pocket that she had, apparently, been keeping in anticipation of this event for longer than Mason was entirely comfortable knowing. "I am prepared," she said with immense dignity, and stayed for an hour. Danny said, "About time," and then spent 10 minutes explaining to Mason, with the enthusiasm of someone who has waited to give this speech, exactly what he had seen coming from the first Saturday morning diner conversation. Mason let him. It seemed fair. Cass Whitmore, Victoria's colleague, called her and said something that made Victoria laugh and step outside onto the Morrow Street balcony and stay there for 20 minutes, which Mason considered a good sign about that friendship. The wedding was planned for the following February. Not the 1st of February, not on the anniversary of the highway, which would have been too neat, too deliberate, the kind of narrative tidiness that real life rarely delivers, and that neither of them wanted. The 14th. Victoria had suggested it with a slight self-conscious expression, and Mason had said Valentine's Day, and she'd said, I know, it's, and he'd said, no, it's good, it's, and they'd both paused, and then agreed that it was in fact fine, that choosing the most deliberately romantic day of the year was the kind of thing that could either be ironic or sincere, depending entirely on how you meant it, and they meant it sincerely, and that was enough. Lily's Flower Girl preparations were extensive and largely self-directed. She had opinions about the basket. She had opinions about the flowers themselves. She wanted the small white ones, she said, not the big showy ones, because the small white ones were real. A distinction she could not fully articulate, but that Victoria had understood immediately and agreed with on the spot. She practiced her walk through the house with a basket of rolled-up socks for 6 weeks, perfecting a pace that she described as dignified but not boring, which Mason thought was actually a pretty good general life philosophy. Victoria moved to Darrow Street in January, not in the way she'd moved in the first time, and not out of necessity, not with the contained efficiency of someone managing a temporary situation. She brought her things in stages over several weekends, and this time she put them in the right places, the places that were hers, and the house rearranged itself around the additions with the natural ease of a space that had been waiting for them. Her books on the shelf beside his, her coffee mug on the hook, the succulent from Morrow Street on the kitchen windowsill, where the light was good in the mornings, where she'd see it every day. She put the old leather notebook in the desk drawer in the spare room. The office now, hers. The one with the goals list. The one with the question written in different ink at the bottom of the page. On the night she moved back in, after Lily was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and opened the notebook to that page. Mason sat across from her and watched her read it, watched her face go through the careful reconstruction of what she'd been when she wrote it. The question still there, just as she'd left it. What is this between us? Is it real, or is it only because I need it to be? She picked up a pen. She crossed it out. One line through it, the same decisive single line she used for completed goals. Then she closed the notebook and looked at him. Crossed off, she said. I see that. She put the notebook down and reached across the table, and he took her hand, the one with the ring on it, and they sat there in the kitchen on Darrow Street in January, the house quiet around them, Lily asleep down the hall, the oak tree bare outside the window, the cold pressing at the glass and unable to get in. There is a thing about this story that resists the word lucky. People would call it luck. Strangers sometimes, when Mason or Victoria told the compressed version, the highway and spare room version, the version that fits in the time between the appetizers and the main course at a dinner party. How did you two meet? And they'd tell it, trading the details back and forth with the familiarity of a thing retold many times, and people would smile and say what a story, what a coincidence, what luck. But Mason didn't think it was luck. He thought about his father and the instruction, you stop, you see if you can help. And he thought about what would have happened if he'd told himself it wasn't his business, if he told himself she looked fine and probably had a phone and didn't need him. He would have kept driving, eaten his sandwich, gone home to Lily and Mrs. Petrov and the laundry and the routine of his carefully maintained life. And Victoria would have sat in a 24-hour diner until 6 a.m. waiting for a tow truck, and she would have been fine, because she was the kind of person who survived things, and she would have found somewhere to stay and rebuilt her company and made her life. But she would have made it alone, because she was very good at alone. The luck wasn't in the flat tire. The luck wasn't in the timing. The luck was that when the moment came, cold highway, stranded car, woman who didn't want help, he was the kind of person who stopped anyway. His father had made him that person. Lily had kept him that person, with her nightly question and her certainty that the answer mattered. Victoria, when he said this to her once, said, "You're giving the flat tire too much credit." "I'm giving my dad credit." "You're giving the circumstances credit." "The circumstances didn't do anything. You did. He thought about that. Okay, he said. We both did. Yes, she said. We both did. That was truer. They had both made decisions on that highway and in the weeks that followed, and in the kitchen at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and in a new apartment on the floor with their hands held and a child asleep on the couch. 100 small decisions, accumulating. That was the actual story. Not the highway, not the flat tire, not the coincidence of timing. The story was the decisions. And here is what Mason Brooks came to understand. In the year between that frozen February night and the February morning when he stood in the front room of the house on Darrow Street in a suit that Danny had helped him pick out and waited for the small procession that would come down the hallway toward him. That the people worth keeping in your life don't usually arrive with clarity. They arrive in the middle of something else. They arrive when you're tired and hungry and just trying to get home. They arrive in inadequate coats and they say, "I'm fine," before you've had a chance to ask. And they mean it as armor. And if you're paying attention, you can see that it's armor. And if you're the right kind of person, you stand there in the cold anyway and wait for them to decide you can be trusted. And here is what Victoria Hale came to understand. In the same year, in the time between a frozen highway and a kitchen table where she crossed a question off a list, that receiving help is not the same as losing. That she had spent years confusing independence with isolation and calling it strength, and that real strength was not refusing the hand but knowing when to take it. That the most frightening thing she'd done was not rebuilding a company from nothing, or fighting a board of directors, or driving home through a February storm in bad shoes. It was deciding that what she felt for a man she'd met on a highway in inadequate circumstances was real, and acting as though it was real, and staying even when she had somewhere else to go. That last part. That was the whole thing, really. Staying when you have somewhere else to go. The wedding was small, 30 people. The house couldn't hold 30, so they used the community room at the public library, Victoria's choice. And when people asked why, she said she liked the idea of getting married somewhere that was built for stories. Mason's coworkers came. Danny was the best man and gave a toast that was, against all expectation, genuinely moving and only slightly embarrassing. Mostly in the part where he described the Saturday morning diner conversation in more detail than Mason had realized he'd retained. Mrs. Petrov sat in the front row in a dress she'd clearly been saving for an occasion of this gravity, and cried from approximately the moment the music started and did not stop until the cake was cut, which she would later characterize as a minor display of emotion. Cass Whitmore came with her husband, and she and Victoria stood in the corner before the ceremony started and talked for a long time. And when Victoria came away, her eyes were bright and her posture was different, lighter, something settled. And she didn't tell Mason what they'd talked about, and he didn't ask, because some things are finished in private, and that's exactly right. Lily walked down the aisle with her basket of small white flowers at a pace she had calibrated over 6 weeks of practice, dignified but not boring. And she took her role with a seriousness that made several people in the room laugh quietly and in a way that was entirely kind. She scattered the flowers with intention. She looked at her father at the end of the aisle with the expression she'd been using on him since she was 3 years old, the one that said, "I see you and I'm proud of you," and Mason had to look at the ceiling for a moment and take a slow breath. Victoria came last. She came through the door in a dress that was the same color as winter light. Not white, not quite, something warmer, and she walked toward him with the steadiness of someone who knows where she's going, and her eyes found his immediately and stayed there, the whole length of the room. And what was in her face was not the careful managed expression she'd arrived with on Darrow Street a year ago. It was open. Fully, deliberately, freely open. The door not cracked, but thrown wide. He thought, this is what a person looks like when they've decided. They said simple things to each other. He'd written his vows on a legal pad at the kitchen table. 3 drafts, the third one finally right in the way the other 2 hadn't been, simple enough to be true. And when he read them, his voice was steady until the last line, which was, "I'm not asking you to stay because you need to. I'm asking you to stay because I need you to, and because I hope, you've decided that you want to." Victoria's vows were shorter. She'd written them herself, and she read them in the clear, deliberate voice she used for things that mattered to her, and they said, "I spent a long time being very good at alone. I thought that was the same as being strong." I understand now that it wasn't. Strength is knowing the difference between walls and foundations. You are a foundation. Lily is a foundation. This is what I'm choosing, not because I need to, not because I have to, not because it's convenient. Because I've seen what this is, and I want it entirely, for as long as it lasts, which I intend to be a very long time. Lily, standing to the side with her flower basket, said, "Yes," under her breath at the end of this, which was not technically part of the ceremony, but which was, Mason thought, correct. They signed the paperwork. Victoria had been right. There was paperwork. There was always paperwork. And they ate the food, and Danny made his speech. And Mrs. Petrov wept, and Cass and her husband danced with slightly more enthusiasm than the space comfortably accommodated, and the library's community room was warm against the February night outside, and the 30 people they'd chosen filled it with the ordinary complicated noise of people who care about each other gathered in a room together. At some point in the evening, Mason found himself standing by the window that looked out onto the parking lot, just briefly away from the noise, with a glass in his hand and the cold pressed flat against the glass from outside. February again. 1 year. He thought about the highway, Route 9, the hazard lights blinking orange into the dark, the figure walking toward him in an inadequate coat. And he thought about what he'd been thinking as he drove that night. Tired, hungry, just trying to get home. Just trying to get home. He'd gotten home. He'd been home all along, on Darrow Street with the oak tree and Lily's bike and Mrs. Petrov's opinions and the laundry that needed doing and the coffee maker and the star stickers on the windowsill of the spare room. But he understood now. Standing with his glass at a library window in February, married, his daughter in the next room teaching Danny's girlfriend the correct way to hold Gerald, he understood that home is not only the place where your things are, it's the people you stop for, the people you offer the spare room to, the people you make eggs for in the morning and sit with in the kitchen at 10 o'clock and hold on to in the dark. His father had known that, had tried to tell him in the compressed, simple instruction of a man who didn't use many words, you stop, you see if you can help. It wasn't about the stopping. It was about the willingness to let people into your life and take the risk that they might change it. Victoria appeared beside him at the window. She had a glass of water. She'd switched halfway through the evening because she was that kind of person, the kind who noticed what her body needed and gave it what it needed without making a production of it. She stood beside him and looked out at the cold parking lot in the February night. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just thinking." "About what?" He looked at her, the ring on her finger, the dress the color of winter light, the careful, brave, stubborn woman who had stood on a highway and said, "I'm fine," and had taken a year to mean it all the way through. "About how it happens," he said. "How what happens?" "All of it," he said. "Everything. How people find each other." He looked back out the window. It just seems so accidental. One wrong exit, one flat tire, and then everything. He paused. "It scares me a little. How easy it would have been to just drive past." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "But you didn't." "No, that's not accident," she said. "That's character." She looked at him. "You can't give the tire the credit. The tire just went flat. You're the one who stopped." He almost smiled. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about this a lot." She looked out the window. "I think about what I was that night. Where I was. I'd lost my company. I had nowhere to go. I was standing in the cold on a highway at 11 o'clock, and I was so sure that I was fine, that I had it handled, that I didn't need—" She stopped. "And then this truck pulled over, and this man got out, and he offered me a coat." She shook her head slightly. "I didn't know what to do with it. I almost didn't take it." "I know," he said. "I could tell." "What made you wait?" she asked. "You could have offered and then left when I said I was fine. Most people would have." He thought about it. "I don't know," he said honestly. I knew you weren't fine. I could see it. And I thought, if I leave now and she actually needs help, I can't take that back." He paused. "And I thought about my dad, wondering what he would have done." She was quiet for a moment. "He would have stopped," she said. "Yeah." "Then you got it right," she said. She took his hand, her right hand, not the left, Just a simple taking, the way she did when she didn't need it to mean more than it meant, which was already enough. You got it right. In the room behind them, Lily laughed at something. A loud, unguarded, completely genuine laugh that cut through the party noise cleanly, and they both turned toward it automatically, the way parents do, the way people do when a sound they love arrives unexpectedly. Lily was showing Mrs. Petrov's cat, Biscuit, who had apparently been smuggled in by Mrs. Petrov in the side pocket of a tote bag, which was absolutely not allowed and which the library staff had chosen not to address, how to shake hands. Biscuit was declining. Lily was persisting. Danny's girlfriend was photographing it. Mrs. Petrov was providing running commentary in a mix of English and Ukrainian that nobody fully followed but everyone appreciated. Mason and Victoria stood at the window and watched their daughter teach a cat to shake hands at their wedding in a library on Valentine's Day in February, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing adequate to say, and the moment didn't need words anyway. It just needed them to be there. And they were. The notebook with the goals list sat in the desk drawer on Darrow Street, and every item on every page was crossed off now. The clients, the funding, the housing, the non-compete, the career rebuilt on her own terms. Every careful, measured goal that she'd written when she was trying to find her way back to herself. All of it done, all of it real, all of it accomplished exactly as she'd said it would be, in the flat, certain voice of someone who doesn't make promises they can't keep. And at the bottom of one page, in different ink, added later, the question crossed off with one clean line. What is this? Between us? Is it real, or is it only because I need it to be? Crossed off, answered, done. The February night pressed against the library windows, and the room was warm with the people they loved, and Lily was laughing again, and the whole wide, ordinary future was waiting on the other side of tonight, imperfect and unguaranteed and entirely theirs. They went back inside together.